Y'all know what's going on. It's time for another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Baker, and welcome to the show, y'all. Last time we left off with Marcus facing a crossroads. On one hand, he had a chance to clear his name as investigators started digging into Tony's past. On the other hand, years of betrayal and bitterness made him question if it was even worth it. Today, we'll explore what Marcus decides and how it shapes his future. Inside those prison walls, Marcus had learned to survive by trusting himself and no one else. But when his mother wrote again, telling him that investigators wanted to talk to him, he couldn't ignore the opportunity. It was a risky move, though. Cooperating could make him a target among the inmates, yet staying silent would mean continuing to carry a burden that was never fully his to bear. After much thought, Marcus agreed to speak with the investigators. In a small, sterile interview room, he laid out his truth. He told them everything: how Tony had planned the robbery, how he'd been manipulated into helping, and how Tony had framed him to save his own skin. The investigators listened intently, but Marcus could tell they weren't making any promises. We'll look into it. One of them said it wasn't much, but it was more hope than Marcus had felt in years. Meanwhile, Tony's situation on the outside was unraveling fast. Facing heavy drug charges, he was desperate to cut a deal, but the authorities weren't interested in his usual tricks. They wanted bigger fish, and Tony didn't have much to offer. It was a bitter pill for him to swallow, realizing that his charm and schemes were no longer enough to bail him out. As the investigation into the robbery deepened, inconsistencies in Tony's story began to surface. Witnesses who'd been silent for years came forward, and evidence that had been overlooked was re-examined. Slowly but surely, the pieces of the puzzle started falling into place. It became clear that Marcus had been telling the truth all along. Then came the day Marcus had been waiting for, a hearing to review his conviction. His mother sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face as the prosecutor laid out the new evidence. Tony's betrayal was laid bare for all to see. When it was Tony's turn to testify, he looked nothing like the confident, smooth-talking brother Marcus had once admired. Instead, he was a shadow of himself, forced to admit his lies under the weight of undeniable proof. The judge overturned Marcus's conviction that day. After years behind bars, Marcus was finally free, but freedom didn't erase the pain or the years he lost. As he walked out of the courthouse, his mother embraced him, but Marcus' eyes were on Tony, who stood a few feet away, looking like he wanted to say something. Marcus didn't wait to hear it. He turned and walked away, leaving Tony behind for good. Forgiveness, Marcus realized, wasn't something he could give just yet. Maybe one day, but not now. First, he needed to figure out who he was outside those prison walls. So where does that leave us? Marcus's story isn't tied up neatly with a bow. Life rarely is, but what we can learn from him is this: the truth has a way of coming out, even when it feels like the odds are stacked against you. And sometimes walking away is the strongest thing you can do. Check this out, y'all. During this brief interlude, I just want to drop something on y'all real quick. Gang involvement among youth is linked to a 70% higher chance of high school dropout compared to non-gang affiliated peers. And make sure to check out episode 4 of this series. As we close this episode of Doing Time with Joe, let this be a reminder: redemption and justice come in many forms, but they often require strength, patience, and a willingness to face the hardest truths. This has been another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Baker, and I say peace, y'all.
I'm getting so tired.